All right, everybody, thank you for joining our webinar on how to improve your performance review process. And just a couple of housekeeping notes before we begin the slide. We're going to be sending out these slides in an email to everybody within, hopefully by the end of the week. So you're going to have these resources to be able to bring to your leadership team in the event that, you find some of these facts interesting. And the same thing, this recording will be available on demand on HelloTeam.com. And if you have any questions, we definitely encourage everybody to ask it in the question area. And at the end, if we have some time, we're definitely going to try and circle around to answer some of those questions about, goals or performance setting. And the last part is at the end of this webinar, you're going to have a quick survey. It's about 3 questions. We're always looking to improve and kind of find topics that you find really interesting and that you're engaged with and interested in learning more about. So we encourage everybody just to take that quick survey so we get as best feedback as possible. And really an introduction about who we have today. Myself, I'm Colin Peterson. I'm one of the client service consultants here at HelloTeam. Really, my job is client success. That's meeting with clients every single month to really discuss, are their performance reviews, are their feedback sessions going well? Kind of help them analyze their survey results to get the most out of their employees and to deliver the maximum amount of value. And I'm lucky enough to be joined by today Tanya Bakalov, the CEO and founder of HelloTeam. And really her background was a co-founder at a 600-person company that grew really quickly. And she became engaged with the idea of how do we really improve the HR space? How do we make it more impactful for employees to get that feedback and then work with those results to kind of deliver more value from employees? And some of the strategies that we're going to be learning today is number 1, the importance of tracking employees' goals throughout the review period. We're going to be talking about performance reviews, and goals are a big part of that. Some best practices around performance reviews. And finally, it's going to be how to modernize your performance review process. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Tanya and take it away.
Thank you, Colin, for the kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be leading this webinar and share best practices on goals and performance management. And hopefully you can all leave with some key takeaways from today's session that you can quickly implement into your own organization. So I have worked with Fortune 500 organizations as well as startups, and I have seen many of those companies using a variety of PM methodologies. And we can discuss some of the pros and the cons in relation to what it is best to do in the culture that you have in your own company. So especially this time of year, this is a hot topic for everybody as they're looking to reassess their processes and do some retrospectives on what went well this year when we did performance reviews, what didn't go so well, and how can we improve in the beginning of the next fiscal year. And I would argue that it doesn't matter how big or small our organizations are, having a modern and a digital way to make the performance review process as transparent, efficient, and engaging for our employees is really the key to our organizational success, because we are in the process of driving outcomes and business value, and the performance review should be seen as a driver of that to our organization. So when we talk about performance reviews, we really look at this in the aspect of what we call the performance review flywheel. There should be 3 aspects of that. First, we should look into our goals and how are we performing against the objectives that we have set up in our companies. Second, we should look at our competencies. Do we have a defined set of competencies against each job role in the company? And can we quickly assess for everybody a way to bring those in our performance review processes. And last, we should not forget about the core company values we have and have a way to kind of test throughout the year, is this a person that fits into the core values of our company? And as our company is changing and embracing new things, is this employee in line with the values that we have set for our organization? So let's first begin to talk about this and the importance of tracking the employee's goals throughout the review process and selecting the appropriate goal methodology to kind of lead us through this journey. So we have more and more people that work remotely and are not part of the everyday conversations and decisions in our corporate headquarters. And we as HR professionals have to work that much harder to set up the right processes, communicate frequently with our employees to ensure alignment, transparency in the vision, in the goals, and the values of our company, making sure that managers are proactive in giving their employees frequent feedback, and help employees fill any gaps in their competencies so they can achieve their professional aspirations in our company. And when we do that, we can all retain our best talent and really ensure the success of our company. So when we talk about, again, around performance reviews and really goals as part of the performance review process, we need to put ourselves in the shoes of an employee and not just look at it from the perspective of HR and how we make it easy and for us to do it, but what's in it for the employees? Why are they not as engaged in doing performance reviews and giving feedback to their employees? So one of the first thing is that maybe our employees don't know where even they have to start. We say you need to write your company goals for the year or the quarter. And whenever I look at an organization, I see this in a variety of different ways. Some people wrote them in a spreadsheet, some people wrote them in a PowerPoint presentation, some people don't even know how to kind of define a goal and what are some of the steps that they need to take in order to achieve that goal. So we need to look at that from the perspective of the employee. Maybe they just haven't done this before and they don't know where to start and how do we help them. Another thing is that goals are usually decided upon annually, and because again we're documenting them in a variety of different ways, people forget them and they don't know that that's what they committed to the organization. And another thing is that oftentimes the goals are set from the top down and employees really don't have a chance to participate in the creation of the goals, whether it's for the department or how do they affect the overall company achievement. So they check out because they're not part of the process. Nobody has asked them to provide feedback and to say what's actually realistic and what's not. Then we may again not have a way to check in with their goals and kind of see, maybe I am checking in frequently with my manager, but my peers is not. There's not a way for us to completely look at the big picture as a whole and decide if we need to change things throughout. And then at the end, as we mentioned, it's a lot of the employees are asking, how will this process affect my pay raise and bonus attainment? What's in it for me? Why am I doing this when I'm not seeing how it all feeds in together? All right, so in order to understand a little bit about goal setting, I'm going to delve a little bit into a history of how goal setting came about, because I think it's really helpful to understand the evolution in a way of the process and where we are today and kind of what's the modern way of looking at goal setting in our companies. So back in the 1960s, a guy by the name of Peter Drucker, he was a professor at Harvard, came up with this concept about MBOs, management by objectives. And it caught on wildfire in a lot of kind of the manufacturing and being kind of this industrialized boom that we were having at the time. And it was a really new concept to talk a lot about how every one of us has to have an objective that several objectives throughout the year, and we need to accomplish them. But often that would be 3 to 5 objectives that we would write, but it wouldn't really talk about how to achieve those objectives and make them into bite-sized material. It would just say something: we need to achieve our financial objectives, we need to complete X and Y project. So that's why in the 1980s, a bunch of other people got together and really kind of came up with this new concept, building upon the good stuff from the MBOs, called SMART goals. And this is what we've been using quite a bit throughout the past 20, 30 years. And SMART, I'm sure most of you know, stands for specific, measurable, assignable, realistic, and time-related goals. So every time we're doing a goal, we need to think about if we're fitting the criteria of a SMART goal. So when we say we need to complete our hiring process, we also need to say, we need to hire 10 people by this time. Who's going to be in charge of hiring those people? And is this really a realistic goal? Is 10 people enough, or are we just, or it's not a realistic goal for our company? And then what happened in kind of the late 90s, this idea came around OKRs. Again, building on what was good about the SMART goals. A guy by the name of Andy Groves, who's the late CEO of Intel, published this book called High Output Management. And it talked about kind of what are the steps that are needed in order to achieve the big objectives of the company. How can we make them into little bite-sized pieces of goals that we can accomplish in a given time? And then, again, building on that, the main investor in Google, when Google was only 10 employees in a garage setting, came in and said, we're going to use Andy Grove's framework of OKRs and run the company that way. So ever since that time, but now Google is hundreds of thousands of employees around the world. Every single employee at the beginning of the quarter writes their objective and key results, or OKRs. And what's important to understand about the difference between SMART goals and objectives and key results really stands in the way that what's added in the OKR framework is that goals should be aspirational, that they're not realistic in the same way that they're in the SMART goals, but we should stretch ourselves. And the other thing that's very different is that they're not tied to pay raises. And oftentimes I talk to a lot of HR professionals, and they'll come in and they'll say, you know what, I just heard from my CEO, they went to a seminar, and they heard about the OKR framework, and they want me to implement it. And I tell them, well, have you discussed with your CEO the differences between what a SMART goal is and what an objective and key result is? Are they planning to tie performance bonuses to that framework or not? Because that's a key difference. In the OKR framework, when you're at 70% achievement, it means the same thing as you've done 100% in the SMART framework. So that is the reason why I wanted to take a little bit of time to go through the history of why this is important, because we need to be educated. We need to be able to then go back to our executive team and explain why are we picking different methodologies in order to run the performance review processes in our companies, and that we shouldn't, just like the acronym and decide that that's what's the best thing for our workplace necessarily.
And this is going to be a good place for us to take a quick poll to really get a gauge of our audience and kind of what you guys are doing in tracking goals. So we're just going to open one up. And really question one, how are you tracking your employees' goals? That's going to include some of the later questions that we'll discuss as well. And really some of the main things that we're seeing right now, and we'll give it a few minutes here. All right, and we'll end the poll here. The main thing that we're seeing on question 1 is how are you tracking your employees' goals, is really kind of these not tracking employees' goals and people seeing the SMART goals. And that's really not surprising. A lot of the clients that I deal with, you know, when they have performance bonuses kind of tied to their goals, they really are using those SMART goals. So those are the ones that are, you know, attainable, achievable, and, you know, also the people that just aren't tracking employees' goals, because there's a cost associated with that. There's some kind of administration of, you know, constantly tracking, setting that up. But that's something that's necessary to kind of get those full results. And Tanya, do you have anything that kind of speaks to you on these results?
Yeah, definitely. I thought the OKR framework would come in at maybe 20-ish%, and I'm surprised that it's at 7%. But it is a very new methodology, and that's why I wanted to kind of delve into it. So when people start hearing it, they can now really relate and understand why it would work or not work in their particular situation.
All right, and pass it back to you to continue.
So here's some examples, because as we mentioned in the beginning, and as we're seeing also with the poll, that about 30% said they are not tracking goals. I think one of the biggest deterrents about not tracking goals is that people are not trained how to write goals. There's not necessarily trainings around that, and especially the new rank and file employees join in and they're asking their managers to, oh, how do I write my quarterly goals or my annual goals, and the managers themselves are not trained to do that. So I wanted to provide a couple of examples here of goals and how you should look at writing a goal, and what's a good goal versus not a good goal, so to say. So if you see here a lot of times, if you give people in the sales department how to write goals, it's very easy because oftentimes it's very measurable, it's black and white, or people in production where you can necessarily say, I need to hit this many KPIs, I need to produce X, etc. But when you're talking about things in our area, let's say in people and in organization, and we have lofty goals to achieve, we may not think right away that they're measurable, but we can find a way to write them in a way that they are. So let's say if our objective is hire, develop, engage, and retain talent. Well, that's a great objective, but what are the steps that we need to do that fit that SMART kind of methodology that we should be writing our goal? We should say, hire how many people by what deadline. If we want to have a more engaged workforce, we can't just write a goal that says, oh, we want to have that as more engaged. How are we going to prove that we actually engaged the workforce? So I like to write a goal that says, next time we have our engagement survey, I'd like to see our employee net promoter scores increase by 25%, let's say, and track myself to that so I can see the progress, right? Whenever we're doing performance reviews, I'd like to say, hey, I want my managers to be done with their performance reviews. I want 90% of them to be done 3 weeks after we finish the cycle. So that's a good goal for me. And then I would go in and make sure that I help them. I see who's behind, who's not behind, to help them achieve that goal, because it is my goal at the same time. Or we want to see that our managers are doing one-on-ones. and I will make a goal for myself that says I want 75% of my managers to have weekly or bi-weekly one-on-ones. And then again, I will hold myself to that standard and make sure that they are delivering on that promise, because it is the promise that I have made to the company. So and oftentimes I will also hold office hours in a way, like just like back in college, to help people write those goals, because it is like a muscle. You need to practice it, you need to be comfortable with it, and even though it comes naturally to us because we're in this position, we have to realize it does not come naturally to the managers, it doesn't come naturally to our employees, and we need to help them get acclimated. And I would often sit and say, well, tell me what you want to accomplish, let's put SMART next to it, and let's go through and make sure that we're doing, that we hit every point on the SMART goal. Another thing that I often see in which with the OKR framework, it also helps you kind of have that top-down but bottoms-up conversations, because really the employees are driving kind of how their success gets tied to the success of the organization. So typically, it's not a process where I'm going to write my goals, the department's going to write their goals, the company's going to write their goals, or I should say first the company and then the department, the personal. It's all at the same time. And then you have that conversation and saying, okay, here's the top 5 things that I want to accomplish. Here's what the manager said that they're important to them. And here's how this department fits into the company goal. Now let's mesh this all together and see how it looks like. But having the visual from an employee perspective, so they're able to see how what they're achieving impacts the achievement of the department, and then the achievement of the department affects the achievement of the company, is such a great feeling all around. And a lot of companies have embraced that style, being able to transparently share their goals so people be more accountable, they can model their behavior. If I don't know also how to write a goal, I can look up how my peers wrote a goal or how my managers have written them, and it makes it so much easier for me to kind of think about what are the things that I want to accomplish in the next quarter or in this year to really affect the success of the organization and in turn my own success. So how do we get started with one of those goal methodologies? So first of all, pick 3 to 5 clear, specific, and again, measurable goals. At the end of the day, if we cannot answer a yes or a no or a question, we should not be writing it as a goal. So it's clear at the end of the cycle, when we have our conversation, that we can check the box and say, yes, we've completed that. Or if we're using the OKR framework instead of the SMART framework, make sure that we've written in the goal in a way that we are stretching ourselves a little bit. So then you always need to make sure that you have some sort of timeline associated with it. So set a time. Is this a quarterly or an annual goal? If it's an annual goal, then try to find it and break it into quarterly goals so it's easier for yourself, and then you're also seeing the achievements throughout. Then decide by talking to the executives, what kind of a company do they envision? What kind of a framework do they want us to implement? Is it an aspirational type of framework or a realistic type of framework? And then as a number 4, decide, do we want to share those goals with the rest of the company? Are they going to be transparent or are they going to be private? I've seen that the more and more transparent you make them, the more successful it is, because again, as I mentioned, you can model your behavior, you're seeing if you're behind or if you're ahead, you're trying to help other people or seeking help from others in achieving your goals. And then do you have the capability to cascade from top to bottom and from bottom up so people can get that visual of how everything feeds into the overall achievement of the company. So we talked a lot about goals. I hope everybody's learning something new. It's a topic that fascinates me. So now let's switch a little bit gears and talk about best practices around the performance review itself. So as you can see, only 8% of companies believe their performance management process is highly effective in driving business value, and 58% say it's not an effective use of time. So I want to talk a little bit about that and why is that perception all around. And I think, again, just like we discussed with the goal setting, what are the impediments of a good goal setting process? We need to put ourselves also here in the shoes of the employees. And why is that not an effective use of their time? What are the things that we can improve in our processes so we make it something that they're not necessarily afraid of or think it's a burden, but they view it as a way for them to drive business outcome, because that's how they get paid at the end of the day. So one of the things that's, we're using sort of like maybe outdated methodologies. The questions are not complete. We sometimes, we're giving them 17 open-ended questions to answer, and really people don't have the time to sit through and do write my own self-review and what I did and what I'm good at and what I'm bad at, and then have to do it for 10 more people and still get my job done. Also, employees don't look at their reviews as a way to get better, but as a punishment. And we need to find a way to make this an engaging process for them, where they're really in charge of providing frequent feedback to their employees. And we can also celebrate accomplishments and recognition and give positive feedback instead of waiting for the end of the year for me to write first that dreaded review and then to get my review when I really can't do anything about it at the end of the year. The year is already done. Now, another reason why they think it's kind of like an outdated process is because oftentimes, again, as we mentioned, everything's done either on paper or it's in spreadsheets or sending something via email, and it's so many different ways, and there's no way for me to look at who's doing better, who's not doing good. It takes a long time by the time we collect it to analyze the information. By the time we do it, it's already outdated. So they're thinking, well, why did they even spend the time to do that? And a lot of times it's also what I call the "what have you done for me lately" effect. When you do a performance review at the end of the year and people only remember what, as a manager, you would remember what you did for me 2 months ago, but I'm not necessarily going to remember what you did for me in January. And maybe it was January when you did your best work and was a big project that was completed. So I often talk about this as kind of like the Oscars effect as well. As you notice, as we're approaching the Oscar season, you'll see all of the movies get released around this time that are contenders for the Oscars. They don't get released in January. It's the same thing. If things are not top of mind, they get forgotten. So we need to change that. And then oftentimes also we are not doing a complete review of the individual. So sometimes we get over-focused on the goals and what somebody has accomplished exactly. Sometimes we get over-focused on the competencies and forget about actually the goals. And a lot of what I see that often gets forgotten is the core values. We speak a lot about core values when we hire somebody, when we want to bring them in, and then we don't test and we don't seek feedback throughout this person's tenure to understand if they're still a good fit for the organization and how well they get perceived. Because if I'm just doing a review between my self-assessment and my manager. I could be one person in front of my manager, and I could have a totally different outlook for the rest of my peers that does not get shared. And we want to make sure that we're getting a really complete understanding of that employee. And as we mentioned, again, it's a burdensome process when we're waiting until the end of the year to do it instead of kind of doing some bite-sized feedback throughout. I think
so we'll kind of discuss
the second question.
We'll discuss some of the results here. And I'm going to share again how frequently are people doing their reviews. And you're going to be able to see that people are pretty much doing them annually. And that's something that doesn't surprise us at all, especially kind of that it goes down as, more frequently. And that's because, I'm sure as HR professionals, you guys understand, the toll it takes on you and the entire organization. And I think Tanya kind of talked about it a little bit, is that connotation about performance reviews. And because of that connotation, we always try and push it off. When really, this is the time that employees are going to be able to show off what they've worked on for the year. And, it doesn't really surprise me, though, that it's mostly annually that people are doing that kind of big, more formal feedback session from them and their managers. All right.
Yeah, not surprising for me at all. But as being in this world for a while now, I'd like to change that, and I'd like to help people change that and change the perception around performance review, turn it more into a way to give and receive feedback throughout the year than just that annual process. And again, just to go back to our performance flywheel, I want to talk a little bit about competencies and values and how they fit into our processes as well. And good segue over here. So understanding our competencies, right? There's 3 types of competencies. There's behavioral, functional, and professional. So in the behavioral sense, we can take a look at those as, examples are our ability to learn or acquire new skills. Are we taking initiative? Are we good at problem solving? And the functional competencies that we need to test for in a performance review are our ability to perform specific tasks. If we are a software developer, how good are we at, writing Java or .NET? Etc. If we are a sales professional, it will be a different competency, etc. You guys know the drill. And then professional competency would be our industry and professional standards. Are we, getting our certifications with HRCI or any other type of industry bodies, etc. And oftentimes, again, as I mentioned, we focus on like one way of doing the performance review, and sometimes we don't include all because it does get a lot. So I would say, pick 2 or 3 things for each of those competencies, go through all of the job roles, make sure that you are updating those job roles with the required competencies together with management once a year, but then test for those more than once a year to see if any of those are things that you can impact with management's help throughout the year. So for example, I have 2 kids and I get a complete report from my school on not just their functional competencies, like are they meeting their objectives in literacy and math and science, etc. But what are the behavioral competencies they need to hit at each stage of their kind of professional, their school life? So are they nice to their peers? Are they nice to their teachers? Are they listening attentively in class, etc.? And sometimes I see that we miss those in the performance reviews because we get too focused on the functional and professional competencies and not so much on like our ability to work well in a team, to communicate well with our peers or with our managers, or our ability to learn new concepts and skills, and being flexible and adaptable. So I just as a recommendation, try to include some of those and test for them at least a couple of times a year. Don't wait until the end to do that. Now, let's talk a little bit about the types of feedback that we can provide. And again, most of you are very familiar with it, I think we already saw even in the poll, that are doing self-assessments and manager assessments with the formal evaluation once a year. But how do we provide for kind of like that other type of feedback, the informal feedback, the one-on-ones, and the 360s? Having a way to just to provide this feedback to an employee on a regular basis, and it doesn't have to be in the informal sense. It doesn't always have to be negative feedback. Having a way to provide with some positive reinforcement that they're doing good, that's also visible throughout the organization. So it's not just the manager coming into me and telling me, thank you for a great job on this, or you could have, or staying late or helping me with whatever, but making that praise and feedback public and social and visible is a great way to reinforce the culture of our company and what we care about. The 360 reviews, I don't even probably have to do a poll. It's something that a lot of companies talk about, not so many companies do. And I say, don't look at the 360 feedback as something that you need to do every year, because it is a lot. It is a burden to the employees to do this. But pick a small step of something that, whether it's the behavioral competencies or the functional competencies, something like that, where you can ask 3 to 5 questions, but do it every quarter. And as mentioned, the way that I'm perceived by my manager could be totally different than the way I'm perceived throughout my peer group or the people that I'm on a project with. And we should know that way ahead of, at the end of the year. So we can talk to that person if they're slipping away, or if they're amazing, if people are genuinely responding that this is an outstanding person, then we also need to recognize that person throughout the organization in a visible way, so other people can model their behavior. And then I wanted to also talk about the one-on-ones. This practice is becoming more and more popular throughout. We have a lot of companies coming in and saying, how do we facilitate this question, this type of review, because it's not in a way a formal review, it's an informal review. And we want our managers to be having one-on-ones, but a lot of our managers are brand new and they're really not, have not been trained on having those types of conversations with their employees. They don't know how often they should have them. How do we help them with that? And it is really true. It's hard to know as a new manager kind of, what's the best practice to do this? How do we structure that conversation? So again, it doesn't become this burdensome thing that I have to do, but something that the employee and the manager are looking forward to having, because there's a benefit to both of them in that relationship. So some of the questions that you could help template for those conversations for your management could be, how are you tracking towards your goals? What are you planning to work on next? Is there something that I can help you with, that I can remove an impediment for you to achieve those goals? How having the ability to check in with them to make sure that they're having a good time and they feel satisfied working for our company. Is there any little things that they have feedback on that I can bring to the next person in my next staff meeting and say, hey, people are saying everything is great, but they're having an issue with such and such. Can we fix that? So it's a way for us to have a structured conversation without the employee feeling like, again, waiting until the very, very end for them to get that kind of feedback. And turning it into a positive, how can I make you more successful with your goals? Is there anything that you'd like to learn that we can help you sign up with a course, or maybe do a job rotation inside of the company because you're interested in marketing and you want to try it out? I'd rather hear this in a one-on-one than wait until the employee is dissatisfied and decides to leave, and it turns out it's because they were not passionate about the role they were working for. They were passionate about the company, but we didn't have the conversation, and now they're out pursuing that dream in another place, and it was a good employee that we could have totally kept in our organization. So this is a great way to supplement your practices that doesn't take a lot of time to do, a weekly or bi-weekly. Here's this template. Please make sure you're scheduling those with your employees. And the last thing that I briefly wanted to mention as part of the performance wheel is make sure to incorporate those company values into your performance reviews, because oftentimes the employee starts, and as I mentioned before, we test a lot for, is this the right fit? Here's our top values, and we're testing for, is this person going to be respectful to others? Are they going to treat our customers with a sense of urgency? Are they going to act with integrity? Are they going to be responsible, etc.? But then when the employee starts, we really don't check back in with them to see how they're living against those values. And we're not, and maybe we're not rewarding them for that, but a lot of times we forget to test for this. And it's really important to kind of get that feel. Again, don't wait until the end of the year. Find a way to do a 360 for each employee once a quarter or something like that, and say, how do you rate this person against this? Do they treat their customers with sense of urgency? Do they act with compassion towards others? And if there's any bad apples, have a conversation before, as we all know, the story of one bad apple can ruin all the good apples in a basket. So don't let that happen by waiting to the end.
In the last part that we kind of already got some answers about is who's really part of your performance review structure. And we saw that it's primarily just the employees and the actual manager, which is good to see that it's not just the manager and that the employees are having those self-assessments. We would kind of like to see a little bit more, like Tanya has mentioned a few times, bringing in those team members, see if they're kind of a culture fit, that they're embodying those company values each and every day, not just when the managers are around them, just when they're being looked on, and to see if they have those competencies. But overall, these are kind of good results where employees are being brought in to do their self-assessment and the managers are doing those assessments.
Yeah. All right, and as promised, this is the third part of the strategies that we're going to be learning today, is how do we modernize our performance review process. And again, not surprisingly, you'll see 77% of employees believe that the traditional performance management system needs to be revamped. Of the ones that are responsible for human resources within companies, this number is even higher. 94% of all of us, think that the annual reviews are outdated and need to be renewed. And again, I wouldn't say necessarily that they're completely outdated. We need to do them. We need to do them consistently, but we should be augmenting them with other practices and not just relying on that one indicator to tell the story about our whole year of existence in this company. So how can we move a little bit further to our goal of modernizing? And so first, make sure that, again, you're not stuck with the big dreaded open-ended questions. Have a way to ask for feedback in a quick way, just like in a survey, whether it's star ratings or scale type questions or whatever. Have a way that you can get results that are not just qualitative but quantitative, that can quickly tell you the story without putting in a lot of work. Have a way of having different templates for different times of year, for where managers can also take some of that responsibility. They're creating the questions with you that fit the way that they're running their parts of the business and what's important for them, and competencies and behavior and culture fit, right? We should not think that like one size, there should be the same exact type of questioning for the entire organization. Yes, it should follow the same process and the same standard, but we should be having different type of collecting that feedback based on the job role of department, etc. Then have a way from an HR, from an administrative point, that we're not the ones collecting. Again, as I've told you before, I've seen it. I've seen performance reviews submitted in so many different ways and shapes and forms that if you have, but that's true for goal tracking as well. If you have 100 people submitting those to you, you will get 100 completely different forms, formats, ways of writing things, etc. So have it as standardized as possible so you can make it easier on yourself, so you can analyze those results as quickly as possible. And then have a way to remind people, and I use the analogy of herding the cats, that you are not the one herding the cats, and figuring out how do I collect all of that, and why are people forgot or somebody's on vacation. No, it's their responsibility. Make it part of their goals review that they're writing their goal, their performance review if they're not completing their performance reviews on time, and have a way that a system sends those notifications and reminders automatically for them when they have not done so. And then again, as we spoke, sometimes we collect all that information, and then because it's in so many different files and formats, and it takes us a long time to compile and to correlate and to analyze in a way that it could be presented to an executive staff meeting or back to management for people that maybe falling off the curve, or for exceptional employees. Have a way that this is all digitally done in a way that it's easy for you to analyze this information before it becomes outdated, and before we're starting on the next cycle, and now what do I do first, right? Goals, collect information, present it, hire, do engagement surveys. What do I do first? The system should be doing the work for you. You should be doing the work of strategizing and not, clicking buttons. So again, make sure that the managers are empowered. They take charge of collecting this information, that there's a way that you're tracking the performance of those employees over time, that if a new manager comes in, they're not going to have to go and collect all of this information because somebody left, or you left the position, or whatever happens, that it's all in one central place. So if I inherit a new team of 20 people, I can go in one place and look at how people have performed. I can look at how they've performed over time, what feedback has been given to them, have they taken any action on that feedback, or do I still need to be involved? Make sure it's all in one place and that there's no bottlenecks around that process. And then always kind of like take a look at the performance reviews also, not with the mindset of who Who are the people that are struggling? Take a look at who are the people that are excelling that we can use for other people to model their behaviors, because we're going to tell the stories of why they're excelling. And we're going to tell the stories in a positive and recognize them through our staff meetings, all hands meetings, etc. So, because at the end of the day, we want to have this as a culture where people want to work, not a culture where they're going to see as being punished for whatever. So how do we get there? I think that's our kind of our recap over here. One, look into a digital way of doing things that's really gonna help you and take a lot of the administrative burdens out of your plate. Make sure that constant feedback is part of your culture, and you're doing something proactively every day or every week, and you ingrain it into the culture of your organization. Shift the company perception of reviews towards having the opportunity to show off accomplishments, as I said, not as a punishment, but as a celebration of success. And then get executive buy-in that may or may not fit your culture. If something is working today and you're seeing value from it, don't switch because Google is doing something. you must be Google tomorrow. And make sure that all the executives understand the value of what you're doing and how that value is bringing real results and real ROI in your organizations. And then take it one step at a time. Again, if everybody has their own journey, you shouldn't be switching things overnight. You should let people get acclimated to different things, and you should be adding things incrementally over time. So, if you are if you're doing goal setting, for example, or you're not doing goal setting, then take one month to create a little practice session for everybody where they're just practicing how to write those things before you implement something. If you're doing an annual review, but you think there should be more constant feedback throughout the organization, try to do one biannual that's with less questions, more quantitative versus qualitative, so you can get that feedback. Or incorporate one-on-one type of questions. Just do little pieces that you're comfortable and you're confident that will be taken in stride with the organization, and not felt like there's one more thing for the employees to do on top of the already committed work.
Absolutely, and this is going to be a snowballing effect too, because as people kind of do more and more of these one-on-ones, informal feedback, they're going to start to appreciate that, and really the culture is going to build itself to get better performers. And finally, thank you very much, Tanya, for being here. And if anybody has any questions specifically, you can ask them here to the group and we can send it out. Or, afterwards we're going to have